We're in that funny little gap between Christmas and New Year. No one knows what day it is, and we're eating leftovers 3 times a day. We're also in between series, and Al said I could do whatever I liked. So I wanted to share some of the best bits from the Ravi Symposium that we went to as a family in September. I've called it Loving Truth in a Post-Truth World. And the outline is pretty simple, brief introduction, talk a little bit about how society has changed, and then what are the implications for us in mission. Some years ago, Karen and I went to a wedding in Queensland. It wasn't someone we knew very well. We didn't know a lot of people there. And at the reception, they did this alternate seating. Apologies for those who've heard this story before, but it is a good one. So Karen's there, someone else is there, and then I'm sitting on the other side of that person. The lady between us was a middle-aged lady who'd been divorced and was quite vocally an atheist. She had a few arguments that she trotted out, and it supported her atheism quite nicely. No one had ever challenged them. But at that stage, I'd had about 15 years of apologetics training at university, and then I was teaching at Cornerstone. So we launched into a discussion about her issues with God. And if there'd been an objective scorer, I would have won 6 love, 6 love, 6 love. Smashed every argument. But after about 15 minutes of that, she turned her back on me and started talking to Karen. After 10 minutes of talking to Karen, she turns half back and says quite loudly, "Well, it's obvious God lives in you." Think about that for a minute. It's obvious God lives in you. So it was a classic case of me winning the argument but losing the person, wasn't it? Apologetics is not meant to be about winning arguments, but it's clearing obstacles so people can see the goodness and the beauty and the grandeur of God. Our world is changing rapidly. Only a generation ago, Hitler's forces were about to wipe out the Allied forces on the beach at Dunkirk. And the last message, a telegram, 3 words long, came from the beach to London. Does anyone know what it said? But if not. Does anyone know where that's from? Could be. But if not. Told you our Bible literacy had gone downhill. Old Testament. Story of Daniel. What was happening? Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego refused to obey the king's edict, and they were in danger of, what was the punishment? Thrown into the fiery furnace. And what did they say? God is able to save us. But if not, we're not going to bow down. Christopher Nolan's quite good movie leaves out what we call the miracle at Dunkirk. 2 amazing things happened. One of them was it galvanised the British people. They grabbed everything that could float and went to Dunkirk. The other thing was the Axis forces pulled back instead of advancing, allowing 350,000 people to be rescued. Do you think if 3 words from an Old Testament book were sent today, Australian general public would understand the message? Bible literacy is gone, hasn't it? In fact, there's been an erosion of that foundation that was Christian. Such that now, in secular world, Christians are generally met with a little bit of hostility, maybe a little bit of apathy. And the whole knowledge about Christianity has really been lost. Such that now people don't really know what Christians believe. Here's a list of 10 things that people think Christians believe. They think that Christianity is all about following rules. Where'd they get that from? Yeah, Christians, often in the media, the little sound grab that you get is a Christian rousing on someone for something, telling them how naughty they are to be doing that. Now, they might have had a 10-minute spiel that was wonderful, but that little bit is the bit they grab. And why do they use that? Because it fits their stereotype, doesn't it? So Christians denouncing things gives the idea that it's all about doing good things. Why are we doing good things? So that we can get to heaven. That they understand that. What about the Christian life is about comfort and ease and luxury? Where'd they get that from? Yeah? So if all our prayers about, may my business succeed, may my relationships succeed, may I get better, may I be healed, what does that sound like? Sounds like the Christian life is all about comfort, ease, luxury and blessing, doesn't it? So maybe we're responsible for that message. What else? We're supposed to hate gays. Who else we're supposed to hate? Other religions? Non-Christians. That's pretty much everyone. Where do they get that from? Yeah, so there's certainly bits of violent examples and some hatred out there, some venom, which you can add to the little 30-second grab of denouncing and imagine that everyone feels that way. We aren't allowed to think for ourselves. We're anti-science. We're supposed to have blind faith. We've really struggled to have a good view of doubt, haven't we? And to get that message about healthy doubt out. We're not allowed to enjoy sex. When did you last hear a good sermon on the wonders of sex? God thought it up. He thinks it's awesome. He knows how to maximise it, but we don't really talk about it. It's like we're ashamed somehow. We have a low view of women. They think that ministers and pastors are the bosses. Al, how's that sound? So that's some of the things that non-Christians think we believe. It's really quite sad, isn't it? And when people tell me about that, and they say, I could never believe in a God like that, I say, well, neither could I. And I don't believe in a God like that. Let me tell you about the God I believe in. Oxford Dictionary's word of the year for 2016 was... the word that it was decided must shape society, post-truth. Only appeared in the mid-90s, but in 2016 it was used 20 more times than the year before. What does it mean? It means that objective facts matter less than personal opinions, preferences, feelings. It doesn't matter about the facts. Interesting, isn't it? The word for the year 2018, does anyone know? Toxic. That's interesting, isn't it? Toxic. Not too surprising, really. You can think about the way we're headed. William Blake said it well in his poem, "This life's dim windows of the soul distorts the heavens from pole to pole and leads you to believe a lie when you see with and not through the eye." What is he saying? Well, Ravi explains it. We're supposed to see through the eye. So sure, you see stuff, but then you sort it, you process it, you think about it. If all you do is take it in, then you're in trouble. So there's been a loss of the ability to think stuff through, to reason. There's been a loss of attention span. This modern generation just scrolls and skims. Scrolls and skims. And as a result, our moral perceptions have become intuitive. When we don't have the ability to sort stuff through reasonably, we have intuition. And people have these powerful moral taste buds. And these are the sort of tests that they're doing without even realising it. They're asking, does it hurt anyone? Is it restricting anyone? Is it discriminating against anyone? And if it is, then it's bad. Self-evidently bad. Ask them, why is it bad? They can't tell you why it's bad. It's just bad. And anyone who would support anything like that is Hitler. Which is why they embraced the same-sex marriage. Most non-Christians thought it was a no-brainer. And literally, it was a no-brainer. They didn't have a reasoned debate about it. They just used these moral intuitions. Seems to be discriminating against someone, that's bad. So, our view of minority groups has changed. In the past we've discriminated against them, now we privilege them and we give them a voice greater than the rest of society. Having lost the ability to reason and to debate differences, we now define harm as disagreeing with someone. To have a different view is actually harmful. Our views of sex and marriage have changed. Sex, according to our society, is a purely physical act that doesn't have anything more than recreation to do with it. If that's what they want it to be, that's what it is. Marriage has gone from a lifelong covenant to a flexible arrangement based on romantic feelings. People want us to celebrate those feelings. Our view of ourselves has changed. The real you lies deep inside. Look down deep inside to find the real you. Now, it may not match your physical body. Live out that real you that you find and you'll be fulfilled. That's the philosophy. And they want other people to accept and affirm that real you as well. Now, Christians who hold a different view used to be seen as quaint and old-fashioned, a little bit out of date. Now we're seen as dangerous and harmful because our views can damage people. People think that if you take truth seriously, then you're going to have serious disagreement, which is going to lead to a devaluing of each other, which is going to lead to intolerance, which leads to extremism, which leads to violence, which leads to terrorism, and you've got 9/11. They've lost the ability to actually reason differences through. This clash of ideas, what they call the culture wars, has a lot of casualties. And one of them is the ability to disagree in a civilised and respectful way. And half of the blame is for Christians who are afraid. We see attacks, we imagine attacks where there aren't attacks, we become defensive and argumentative, and we project a front that supports many of the misconceptions that people already have about us. Acts says that when Paul looked around Athens, he was deeply troubled. Why was he so troubled? The people were lost, weren't they? They're just so lost. And he loved God and he loved the people, and it troubled him. So what do? We look around and we get troubled. What are the implications for us? I'm going to give you 3 B's. How do you reach a generation that thinks with its eyes and reasons with its feelings? Be loving. This could be 1, 2 and 3. How do you reach a generation like that? You live beautifully. Energised by the same Spirit that created the universe and empowered Jesus. You live with integrity. The same wherever you are. No mask, no facade. Not perfect, but authentic. That beautiful self-forgetfulness. That the child of God, secure in whose they are, can love people out of that security. Pascal said, make it attractive, and then people can learn that it's true. Scripture says, taste and see that the Lord is good. Seems like people need to taste the goodness of it before they can recognise the truth of it. We feel like we have to pick between the truth and the love. But Jesus seemed to manage it, didn't he? He wore the criticism, friend of sinners, like a badge of honour. And sinners wanted him around. Do you think he pointed out everything they were doing wrong? Or maybe he just delighted them. They knew their lives were broken. Sure, he held out an invitation to repent, but he delighted in them. We are not the world's moral police, rousing on people, rubbing their noses in the mess they've made. Yancey tells a story about sharing with a young girl who's struggling with drug addiction. She dabbled with prostitution just to survive. And he said, have you ever thought about going to church? She said, why would I do that? I already feel bad enough about myself. Our job is to shine. And the gospel has no moral superiority to it, does it? We're not saying we're better. We're actually saying we're broken. All we did was recognise it. And we accepted the gift of forgiveness and salvation. We're all broken. The gospel is the beautiful, ultimate level playing field. Sam Albury is one of Ravi's team from the UK. He shared about speaking at universities and protesters would come. And the good thing about that was that he would be early and the protesters would be early, so he could get to talk to them and listen to them. And when he listened to them, he found out that they were scared. They thought the Christians hated them and they were afraid. Love listens. And listening contradicts the accusation of hate. What we're saying is, I don't think you're a freak. And we're backing it up with our actions. When we listen, we hear their pain and their fear. We're worried that our lack of condemnation will send the wrong message about the holiness of God. But our job is not to convict the world of sin. Everyone's had that grumpy teacher who should have resigned long ago, long since cared for kids, and now is just irritable, just eager to catch kids being naughty. And that's the picture of God we create when all we do is denounce. When we denounce all the time. We fit the stereotype that the media wants. Remember, people are not distant from God because they're immoral. They're immoral because they're distant from God. Redemption comes before righteousness. So we need to stop worrying that our lack of criticism will send the wrong message about God. Be more worried that our denouncement misrepresents His heart. We're called to unconditional love. That's not the same as unconditional affirmation. If one of our friends wants to ask us about something in their life, we can explain it, but it's from the bigger perspective of God longing for them to be free and whole. So, apologetics needs to be felt, not argued, and we answer a person, not a question. I was at a skeptic seminar at a university, and a big auditorium. We were doing a Q&A, and there was a guy about 3 rows back in a suit, long hair, beard. If you googled philosophy professor, a picture of this guy would come up, and he asked a question about pain and suffering, and I answered it in accordance with the logic and reason of a question like that. How does an all-powerful, all-loving God allow pain and suffering? But I sensed it didn't quite meet his need, but he didn't ask anything else. But afterwards I caught up with him, and his brother had just been diagnosed with cancer. So I'm imagining it's abstract, philosophical question, but it's actually a very personal, emotional question. So it was a mismatch between the person, the question they were really asking. So we need to model the love of God in the way we answer it. How do we reach a generation that thinks with its eyes and reasons with its feelings? Be beautiful. How are you beautiful? Be filled with God. What did I convince that lady of in 15 minutes? That there were rational arguments for God? Probably not. Perhaps that I was a smart pit. What did Karen convince her of? That there was a God? Yes. That God could live in a person? Yes. That God was actually living in a person right in front of them. And that was a good thing. And I wonder how much of that time was spent listening, asking good questions, showing compassion. Be beautiful. Be filled with God. So, what was number 1? Be loving. Number 2, be ready. Be ready for what? Well, be ready for questions. There are a handful, really, of common spiritual questions. Pain and suffering, don't all religions lead to God? Wasn't Jesus just a good man? Hasn't science disproved God? How does hell work? And you can have thought through answers for them. Shape them for your questioner, but use good illustrations. A guy called Abdu Murray was a former Muslim, now on the team with Ravi. He tells a story about buying a house which had a beautiful, lush, green, sloping backyard. Wonderful for his little kids to play on. But it ended at the 110 freeway. So what did he do? He built a fence. And he uses that to explain God's no's are often the flip side of his yeses. With that fence in place, his kids can play freely and have a ball. What we see as God being prohibitive is often the flip side of him wanting us to play freely. Jason Stevens, the NRL footballer, also a Christian, finds himself having to explain the Christian view on sex a lot. And he uses the analogy of petrol. And he says, now, in an engine, petrol is ignited and it is focused and it generates great energy. Think of the engine as the Christian marriage. Unconditional love, commitment, support, security. In that setting, petrol works beautifully. Splash it around and ignite it, and everyone gets burned. Nice little analogy that people can understand. So be ready for spiritual questions. Have some good analogies that work for you. Be ready for common questions. What do Australians ask each other when they meet? What do you do? So think about your answer. Your answer should be interesting, not weird. Maybe a little bit intriguing. Maybe lead somewhere. Maybe it's an open door. Be ready for common questions and have thought them through. 1 Peter 3:15 says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give a reason for the hope that you have. So be ready for questions. Be ready with questions. So we need to regain that lost art of question asking. If you listen to the questions people ask, they're sort of random, skimming along the surface. But if you ask questions that show you're really listening, that invite people to go deeper, then you'll be surprised how deeply you can go. Be ready with your story. Be testimony ready. Think about how to shape your testimony. It still needs to be your story, but you can shape the language, you can shape the themes in line with the person. You can share your story in a way that matches their needs. We had a guy, I'll call him Mark, hopefully won't use his real name. He quit his job and started paddling down the Darling River. And he got out at Burke. And from memory, I think Ian Cole met him. And he thought, if I can slow this guy down, I reckon he'll become a Christian. So he offered him a job. So this guy started working on the farm alongside the farm guys and the cornerstoners. And a few weeks later, I heard that he'd become a Christian. And I said, wow, how did that happen? And they said, with Pete, after work in the car park, one shift. And I thought, Pete? Pete is what you would call a struggler. He's far from stable, had his real issues. Why do you think he became a Christian with Pete? Because Pete invited him. Pete said, Mark, you've been here a few weeks, you've seen how we live, what's going on. Would you like to become part of the family? What's stopping you? The guy said, nothing. Why Pete? Because Pete invited him. We need to be ready with invitations. So what was number 1? Be loving. Number 2, be ready. Number 3, be confident. Have confidence in God and the power of His gospel. Apologetics can sometimes feel like you're the PR person for a political candidate who's getting hammered in the polls and they're going to lose the next election. But we're not, and He's not. Apologists say God never feels more unreal than when they just defended Him in a public forum. God never feels more unreal than when they just defended Him. They won the debate. Why should He feel unreal? Because it feels like His existence rests on your cleverness. But it doesn't. It doesn't rest on anything to do with us. God is His own defence. Set Him loose. Invite people to do a God experiment. To just pray, God, if you're there, show me. And then buckle in for the ride. And pray yourself expectantly. Remember, He's been at work in people long before you were around. And He'll be on their case after you're gone. Paul was eager to get to Rome. Why? Because he wanted to let loose the power of the gospel. because it saves people. He was not ashamed. He was eager to let it loose. When you get to know people, you'll see a real hunger. People are lost, they're scared, they're confused, they're stressed. They want what works. Technology and science, for all its advancements, has not made them happier or better people or more fulfilled. If anything, it's less. There is a great harvest to be had. This has been called the grand age of mission. We know about great growth that's happening in many countries, but even in the West. Tim Keller tells a story about starting a church in New York City, and they said, "You're crazy. There's no families there. There's the sort of yuppies, the young, sophisticated singles. There's the very poor. There's no families. You need families to make a church." But within 20 years, this church had grown to over 5,000, and they had spawned more than a dozen sort of daughter churches in the area. And their churches were made up of young people, educated, sophisticated, multicultural, but they were looking for the real thing. Similarly in urban London. In academia, it is now estimated that up to 25% of teaching staff in the philosophy department identify themselves as Christians. 30 years ago that was less than 1%. Why would professors of philosophy become Christians? Crazy, isn't it? People are looking for meaning, for belonging, for identity. They're looking for the real thing. Never doubt the power of God. The bit that gets forgotten in that verse is the beginning bit. Set apart Christ as Lord in your heart. That is the key. Stay connected to the Master. We're not responsible for our fruit. We are responsible for our connection to the Master. In the wedding reception story, I had knowledge. Knowledge puffs up. Karen was love. Love builds up. There's a great harvest to be had. God weaves this seemingly random, crazy mix of pain, beauty, joy, heartache, disappointment, goodness, joy, all together in this thing called life. We might find it challenging, but it is the perfect mix of ingredients for people to respond to His offer. Be ready, be loving, be confident. Love and truth meet ultimately in the cross. And Al's going to take us through communion.